Hey everyone, Tim Anderson here, aka Renfail, sometimes known as the Bearded Dwarven Princess, but today just call me Renfail. We're going to be diving into virtual tabletop programs today. More specifically, we're going to be diving into why we chose to use Fantasy Grounds for our official efforts in the VTT space, as opposed to, say, FoundryVTT or Roll20. If you know anything about virtual tabletop, then you're probably already going to know all this stuff. But if you're new or you want more information, this might be a video that you find useful, which is where I get to the point where I can say, if you're new here, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell icon so you get updates like this in the future. And if you do like what you hear today, don't forget you can join as a member of the Adventurers Guild for as little as $3 a month, or you can drop a super thanks at any point throughout the video as a way of saying thanks and supporting. There's also a Patreon page for our 5th edition tabletop setting, but we're going to talk about that at the end of the video. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get into today's topic. Now, there are several virtual tabletop programs out there, as I previously mentioned. The big three being Roll20, which is probably the most popular option because it's the most accessible and it will only become more so under the helmet of the new CEO. But there's also Foundry VTT and Fantasy Grounds. Now, when we started our latest project, which is the World of the Weave and the Void, which is that world map behind me, we knew from the beginning, when we started this off in early 2021, that it was going to be a 5th edition tabletop setting. We also knew there was going to be a book series, and we also decided to put a point and click game set in that world. Everything I looked at from the beginning was sort of looking at what Tracy Hickman and his wife did when they first created Dragonlance and how that became the phenomenon that it did. But more importantly, I looked at how they built a world first that was a series of tabletop campaigns, and then the books came later, and then video games came after the books. So we kind of looked at that as our like ground zero foundational R&D project and said, how can we mirror that? So when we started everything, we knew it had to be a 5th edition tabletop setting, or at least it had to be a tabletop setting. It started off as 2nd edition, modified with hybrid rules for my homebrew stuff over the years. But then eventually I decided it was just going to be easier to make that into 5th edition, so we set it in 5th edition rule set. But we knew it was going to be a tabletop setting. Then we could have the books set in that space and the point and click game. All of that stuff, by the way, patreon.com/wandering hermits. You can pre-order the tabletop books, the source books out June 1st. We're starting the live stream campaign on June 5th, twitch.tv/weave and void. Also, the book chapters coming out twice a month on the Patreon page, and the point and click game, which is out later this year. You could download the demo for free over at the Patreon. So once we knew we had a setting in place, we knew that we wanted to live stream that campaign for publicity and to get word out about this homebrew setting and its marketing 101. But we weren't sure what VTT program we wanted to use. Now, when we did the play testing in, I think it was August, September of 2021, we did play testing of our first campaign module with our patrons from Patreon, with a handful of those folks. Those episodes are live here on my personal YouTube channel. If you dig into the Project Drammond playlist, which you can find somewhere on here, before we started calling everything the Weave and the Void and it branded it, it was known as Project Drammond, the code name. And we did, I think, 6 episodes of play testing August, September of 2021. So you can go back and dig up those episodes if you'd like. We used Roll20 for those. And Roll20 is accessible and it's easy to use, but it lacks documentation and it just doesn't have a lot of flexibility for some of the things that we wanted to do with it. Then there was FoundryVTT, which is more robust than Roll20, or at least it was at the time we were looking into it, but it was way more complex and needed a lot of there was a lot of intricacies to it. And as we were going about things, we had a community member who came to us and said, "Hey, I use this thing called Fantasy Grounds." And so I went and looked at it, and I was immediately sort of intrigued by the combat aspects of Fantasy Grounds, because one of the things that Fantasy Grounds did very well and still does is they have constant, continual live streams on their Twitch and YouTube, and they do tons of tutorials on how to use their programs, which immediately drew me in because I went, cool, I'm sort of a VTT noob. I would love to know more. How do I get using your program? Um, and everything else. But honestly, the seller for me was the combat stuff, which we're gonna get into in a little bit. Now, we just finished playing The Lost Mine of Phandelver because we had to figure out did we were we actually going to use Fantasy Grounds for our homebrew setting for the Weave and the Void. So we gathered a party of adventurers. We gathered Nathan Napalm, Simmerg, Bounty Code, and Sparrow, which those four people joined my brother, my wife, and I, me being the DM. And we played through the Lost Mine of Phandelver campaign in Fantasy Grounds using an official module so that we could learn Fantasy Grounds from the ground up, actually running through it in an officially sanctioned module that has all the bells and whistles and maps and encounters and everything set up, which allowed us to sort of get the most out of Fantasy Grounds in my mind, to sort of learn what we needed to learn from it. Now, if anybody wants to chime in at this point, because I'm going to start talking about some of the things I really love, feel free to chime in, leave your comments below, whether you're going to be talking about, well, Roll20 can do that and FoundryVTT can do that. I would love to hear those things because I am not intimately familiar with Roll20 and FoundryVTT. I am fairly familiar now with Fantasy Grounds because we just finished up basically 4 months of doing The Lost Mine of Phandelver, and now we are in the middle of preparing the characters for our adventure, which kicks off in early June. Our books, as I may have previously mentioned, the source book is out June 1st, and the campaign is coming shortly after that. We are playing through with Nathan Napalm, Simmerg, Bounty Code, and Sparrow, same group that we just did the Lost Mine of Phandelver campaign with. So one of the things I love about the Fantasy Grounds platform is that it has this combat system where everything is tracked through the turns and the rounds, and it does it all for you through the combat tracker. So this was really what sold me on the program because you can do the maps and you can do the tokens and you can do Light Source and Fog of War and all this other stuff in Roll20. You can do that in FoundryVTT. But the combat stuff with Fantasy Grounds was what got me because all of the stuff that you would normally need to pay attention to. Here's an example. We're in a party, we're going up against a group of orcs, and I cast Stinking Cloud. Normally, I would need a roll to see how long, well, depending on the system you're using, I'm giving an example. I would roll to see for how long, or unless it has a set duration, you would determine what is the duration of the spell. Once you know the duration of the spell, you then have to manually keep track of that if you're playing traditional tabletop, right? And other, at least when I played Roll20 in 2021, it didn't have any way to automatically track that stuff. At least not that I knew. Anyway, Fantasy Grounds does that for you. So if you cast a spell that has a duration on it, and you're using the turn system through the combat tracker, it's automatically tracking all of that stuff. So you don't have to pay attention to when that spell is going to wear off because it's automatically going to wear off as you go through the turns and the rounds. Really, really useful. There's also the turn tracker, which allows you to very easily go through and just go, okay, you finished. Now it's your turn. Now it's this person's turn. Now it's the enemy's turn. And because it tracks everything based on initiative, it automatically sorts everything in the combat tracker based on the initiative rolls. So it's already set up. You don't have to do any of that stuff on your own, which is brilliant from a time saving perspective and from a logistics perspective because I, as the dungeon master, don't have to pay attention to any of that stuff. It just does it. It's great. And then going through, if a character is incapacitated or they get something on them, you can manually assign the effects to a character and make them prone or knock them unconscious or poison them or things of that nature, and it will automatically apply those effects. Not automatically, excuse me. Some of these you have to do, with the effects system, but you can apply those effects to players as well as NPCs. The cool thing too is that if you're using a campaign module like the Lost Mine of Phandelver, a lot of these encounters are already set up for you. All the official ones are set up. So like when you have a map and you load the campaign in, right? You have the PDF, or it's not a PDF, but it's the digital version of the campaign. You've loaded it into Fantasy Grounds, and let's say you pull up the map for the caves, right? The very first caves that you do, and you've got the goblins in there. When it comes to an encounter, you can open that encounter, add it to the combat tracker. It automatically adds all of the monsters from that encounter to the combat tracker, and they're already set up on the map. So everything is already there. So you hit the button, boom, they're in the combat tracker, boom, they're on the map, and you can immediately get into combat play without needing to manually drag and drop tokens onto the map, which is really cool from an official campaign standpoint if you're playing officially sanctioned modules, because it's very easy. It's all drag and drop and click buttons and boom, all the encounters are there. And the maps are set up with grids and everything else, which again, the grids are in other places. Fog of War is in other places. I understand that. I'm talking about the things that I really like about Fantasy Grounds. Now, beyond the ease of use and the fact that the official modules are there, there is a learning curve associated with this next part. But one of the things that got me early on, along with all of that stuff, was when I was watching these tutorials of how to create your own module, like how to take your homebrew module and put it into the game and actually create the maps and add the encounters to the map and create the encounters and assign the special abilities to the bosses and everything else. You can modify everything through the editing system. You can also create maps within Fantasy Grounds, or you can bring in your own maps and import them in, but then you can add elements to the maps if you want to. So one of the things that we've done for a lot of our maps is we've created very basic sort of dungeon maps and battleground maps. Some of them have a lot of details, some of them have less, because I specifically made them to be basic maps so that anyone who wants to use those maps can load them into Fantasy Grounds or Roll20 or VTT, and they'll have a basic dungeon map or a basic tavern map or a basic city map or city street or whatever the case may be. And then it's like, oh, maybe I need an extra wagon over here, or I need a couple of extra boxes over here. Well, you could do that within Fantasy Grounds because they have their own assets within Fantasy Grounds that you can add to the maps along with that map maker system, which is very robust. It's growing all the time. It's getting better all the time, but it's very robust even as it is now as of this recording. So it's really nice to be able to take a basic map, throw it in there, and then you can tweak that map to make it different for different encounters just by dragging things in from their existing asset packs within Fantasy Grounds and just flesh the map out from there. Really cool stuff. Um, I feel like I know if you go back and watch the 6 episodes of playtesting when I was using Roll20, I was confused about a lot of stuff with Roll20. I couldn't figure out how to get light sources to work for characters. Fog of War was really a pain in the ass. I think Fog of War was even like a premium feature, so I ended up having to like subscribe to get that and everything else. Whereas in Fantasy Grounds, it's so easy to like you just pick a character in the combat tracker, and then you have the effects bar, and you just add the effect or the light source or whatever the case may be to that character, and it's already got the values assigned and the time limits and everything else, and it's very easy to use. So those are just some of the reasons from a DM's perspective why I love Fantasy Grounds so much, because of the combat tracker, the robustness of the map making system, and how easy it is to just get everybody up and going and playing, as opposed to needing to do all this other stuff with other programs. Now, there is a learning curve. Definitely is a learning curve, and Fantasy Grounds is not without quirks. One of the quirks that we've noticed is my brother, for some odd reason or another, and it may be related to his connectivity because his internet is, he's on an actual Wi Fi tower out in the middle of nowhere. But he doesn't see this in any other games or MMORPGs or anything else. But when we're playing Fantasy Grounds, he will often get disconnected. He'll still be connected to the game, and he can still see and everything else that's going on, but he can no longer control his character. Like his roles won't show up. He can't move the character on the map. He'll have to log out and relog back in to flag the system that he's the one in control of that character. That may be a connectivity quirk on his end. And there are some limitations, like for example, um, one of the things we're doing with our homebrew campaign, and we did the same thing in Fantasy and in Lost Mine of Phandelver. Sparrow likes to have pets, and she had a druid. Yeah, she had a druid in Lost Mine of Phandelver, and she wanted to have an actual pet accompany her as a companion. There's no easy way to just like take a monster from the NPC manual, drag it to the combat tracker, or the character sheet, I should say. You can drag it to the combat tracker, but you can't drag it to the character sheet and make that a controllable character by someone in your party. I would love that function, that feature, that functionality. So if you're listening, devs, maybe look at that. The only way that we know how to do it right now, and if there's a better way to do this, I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments below, is to actually just find the character, find the pet, the animal that you want, and then create a character using a character sheet, and create that pet as a character, and then you can control that character sheet and have that character on the map and in the combat tracker and in the party window. So, for example, the character that Sparrow is creating right now is a dwarven warden from our homebrew setting, and the wardens have animal companions, and she wanted a dwarf with a honey badger. And so, to create her honey badger, if you watched this last Sunday's fourth fourth episode of character creation as we prepare for the campaign. That aired on May 15th. We were in Fantasy Grounds creating these characters from scratch, and one of the things we had to do was just make that honey badger as an actual character on a character sheet and tweak some values here and there. Also with Homebrew, because we're doing 5th edition setting, one of the things that I really like about Fantasy Grounds is we just were able to very quickly and easy modify the existing character sheets to allow for our unique races and classes. Because we're doing things that are, even though it's a 5th edition rule set, we're using the 5th edition rule set. We do have a homebrew campaign that has completely different magic systems, and quantum mechanics and some other stuff that are unique. And so we've had to modify things a little bit here and there. And of course, we have our own unique races and our unique classes. But it's very easy to go in and just take like a wood elf, create a character, and then change that to be a brownie. And all you do is you just strip out some of the wood elf characteristics that would come with a 5th edition character, like trance is a good example because wood elves or and all elves get trance, right? So you can just strip the trance out, and now you have this character who's a brownie because they're cousins of wood elves in our world. So some really cool stuff going on with Fantasy Grounds. I may do a series on this. This is something Nathan Napalm and I have talked about this because he's running he's running a different campaign on Monday nights using Fantasy Grounds, and then of course we're doing everything homebrew in Fantasy Grounds. So we have two different perspectives going on because I did run an official D&D campaign, but Nathan's running two official D&D campaigns back to back because they're doing the two dragon queen. I forget what they're called, but it's like a level 1 to 12 adventure, I think, or 1 to 15. I don't remember. They just finished up the first book the other day, I think, and they're getting ready to go into the second book. So between he and I, we both have some unique perspectives on how to work within Fantasy Grounds and how to make different things work. But it's a fairly robust system. It is a little pricey compared to say Roll20 because Roll20 has a free option. There is a free option with Fantasy Grounds if you're joining as a player, but if you want to host any sort of games at all, there are no freebie options as far as I understand things. You can either pay a monthly subscription or you can just pony up and pay for a ultimate license, which you own it forever, which is what we did. Um, you can wait until they run discounts. We got lucky and got the Ultimate License as well as the official 5th edition Dungeon Master Guide, Player's Handbook, Monster Manual, um, all when things were about 20% off. So we got a pretty significant discount when we purchased ours, but it's still, we just shell out, a couple few $100 to get all the things that we needed to get up and running. But for us, it was worth the cost because this isn't just a hobby for us. This is also a business because everything we're doing with the World of the Weave and the Void is for game dev and to sell as a product. That being said, this is where I actually get to. I know I did a little promotion in the beginning, but I'm going to do a lot of promotion right now as we get to the end of this. If you would like more videos on Fantasy Grounds, please let me know. I would be happy to include those here on my personal YouTube channel. It's tabletop is a huge passion of mine. I did 5 or 6 tabletop tips episodes. They weren't very well received by the existing community at the time, and the algorithm didn't pick them up either. So I didn't get enough views to justify doing more of those. So if you want more like this, you need to make sure to interact with the video, like the video, comment with the video, share the video out. All those things are good because it helps me know and it helps the algorithm know that you found this video valuable and you want more like this. Now, that being said, if you want to watch Fantasy Grounds in action, every Sunday night at 9 p.m. Central at twitch.tv/Weave and Void, we are playing the official homebrew campaign for the Weave and the Void. It is a 5th edition tabletop setting, and we are playing in Fantasy Grounds every Sunday evening. We are using that world behind me as the setting. It's the world of the Weave and the Void. It is a project created by myself, my brother, and my wife, specifically produced through our Patreon page. Now, the previous venture that we had with the Saga of Leucemia and Stormhaven Studios, we went out and raised money from investors and all this other stuff for the MMORPG. And we're not doing investors this time around. It's 100% done through Patreon. So, if you want to support the project, you got to go through Patreon. That's just how we're doing it. There are multiple tiers. The first tier being $3 a month gets you in, and you get access to the book chapters, which come out twice a month. And that's a lot like Dragonlance. We have chapter art that Chris is doing for each chapter, and I have multiple POV characters. And I very much use the Dragonlance novels as sort of a guideline of how I wanted to write this series. So if you like Dragonlance, you will probably like this book series. So at the base level, you get access to the book chapters, concept art snippets, and so on and so forth. Then there's an $8 a month tier, which gets you access to the eventual published book version of the novel once we've finished all the chapters. Then at the $15 a month tier, you can pre-order the tabletop book that we have coming out, the source book that's launching on June 1st. Now, there are caveats to the $8 and $15 a month tier because those have some minimum monthly requirements before you get access to the pre order stuff. We also have a $25 a month tier that is there for the people who want a copy of our point and click game, which comes out later this year. It's called An Adventurer's Tale, and it's a lot like King's Quest if you like that kind of stuff. There is a demo that you can play now over on our Patreon, and a whole bunch of videos and stuff that you can check out on the YouTube for The Weave in the Void. In addition, our Discord channel, which also hosts our gaming community, has an entire section about the Weave in the Void. The Discord is the Wandering Hermits Discord. It's what we set up for this project behind me, and it just happened to be that we end up spinning our gaming community into that, and I do all my personal YouTube stuff through the Renfail's Refuge section of that Discord channel. So check all that stuff out, and if you want to get involved with our tabletop project, go to the Patreon page for that. Patreon.com/Wandering Hermits, and the links are down there. Now, if you just want to support my YouTube channel, the best way to do that is to drop a super thanks on older videos, join as a member of the Adventurers Guild, or you could tune into one of the live streams and you could drop a super chat or sticker during one of the live streams. And it's a great way to buy me a cup of coffee and say thanks for the content that I produce. But hopefully, we'll see you over in the Patreon page and in the Discord and tuning in live as we continue to play through our campaign with Fantasy Grounds every Sunday night at 9 p.m. Central, twitch.tv/Weave and Void. Thanks so much for your time every day. No, I said that wrong. Thanks so much for your time, everyone. There we go. Hopefully, I'll see you in the next episode. Stay tuned, stay safe, happy gaming.